Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you to Plaza for hosting today. Really excited about today's talk. We were just discussing how much we love Ecoline brush pens. They came out in 2016, 2017 in North America, and they were all the rage. They're such a wonderful product. So it's great to be kind of lighting a fire again of creativity behind these wonderful products. And I'm excited to share with everybody some information on them and watercolor in general. So the way I'm going to break it down today is going to be first a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about watercolor in general, and then go in to discuss specifically what liquid watercolor or fluid watercolor are and what distinguishes them from traditional watercolor. Then I've got a fun demo to kind of test drive them. It'll be a great demo for folks who have never used a watercolor marker before, as well as for folks who are pros and just want to test drive these and see what they can do. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and you should see a presentation pop up here in a second. There we go. All right. Ecoline, or as the Dutch pronounce it, Ecoline. So Royal Talens, of course, is a Dutch company, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them. So Ecoline has been a product that we have had since the 1930s, and I'll talk more about that during the presentation. So it's been out there a long time. It's been a favorite for illustrators, designers, and fine artists for years. The brush pens, though, however, are brand new. As I said, 2016, 2017. Super fun way to use this wonderful color, and I'm going to share some of those techniques with you today. A couple things about Royal Talens. As I said, they're a Dutch company. They were founded in 1899, and this is the original building right here. We don't have that building anymore, obviously, but we're still on the same piece of real estate in a fun little town called Apeldoorn, which is about an hour east of Amsterdam by train. This is a picture of the factory floor in the 1930s. And one of the things I love about this picture is that it was before electricity was powering the paint mills. You can see all those belts and wheels. It was all steam powered back then. Super fun. And one thing you can't really see in this picture that I love in a lot of these archival images is many of the workers are still wearing Dutch wooden shoes. It's so fun to see. This is Queen Wilhelmina. And the reason I'm sharing an image of her is you may have noticed on the building, it just said Talens, but up above it says Royal Talens. In 1949, Queen Wilhelmina bestowed upon us the royal predicate. We became paintmakers to the Queen, if you will. It was for our economic and cultural contributions to the Netherlands, and it didn't hurt that Queen Wilhelmina was an amateur painter herself, and the summer palace for the Dutch royal family is also in Apeldoorn. Ecoline, as I mentioned, is one of Royal Talens products, but we have a whole umbrella of products. It includes Rembrandt, oils you may be familiar with, soft pastels, Van Gogh, watercolors and oils and pastels. Also, Amsterdam is our most popular acrylic line here in North America. Brunswick pencils, a long list, a big family of products all underneath the Royal Talens umbrella. Royal Talens North America was established in 2015, so brand new. Our products have been here since the 1930s, but now in Northampton, Massachusetts, we have our own distribution center and customer service for artists in North America. And then just a quick shout out to the Royal Talens Foundation. It's a global foundation. It supports art and art education around the planet. An example of one of their recent endeavors was supporting art and art education in Poland for Ukrainian refugees. So they do a lot of great work and wanted to mention them. And you can learn about them both at royaltalents.com or royaltalentsnorthamerica.com. And I am Jeff Olson. I am a painter, been exhibiting my artwork now for 30 years. I've been in the art materials industry for 27 years, and I taught art history and studio art for about a decade at university. And I'm actually here in Savannah, Georgia today, teaching this week at the Savannah College of Art and Design. So a real pleasure and privilege to be here. All right, so our agenda today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of watercolor overall. Then I'm going to share some of the composition of what goes into the making of a watercolor. And then I'm going to focus on the binder for watercolor. Binders are really important for all paints. Pigments are universal. We use the same pigments in watercolors that we do with acrylics or oils. It's the binder that gives each medium its unique working properties. Then I'm going to focus in on the coloring agents. I'm going to talk about pigments, but I'm going to spend a little extra time on dyes today because Ecoline are dye-based. And there are some advantages and disadvantages to that, and I'm going to go over that with you all together today. And then we're going to get into some of the qualities of Ecoline and what distinguishes liquid watercolor from traditional watercolor. And then, of course, the demonstration in the last half. So let's take a dive into the history of watercolor. So watercolor is actually one of the oldest mediums that artists have been using. Some of the earliest examples of art, whether it's the Paleolithic caves in Lascaux or going to looking at Aboriginal images in Australia, several thousands years of old. We're talking 60,000 years for the Aboriginal images. When we analyze the materials, it's really just pigment and water. So the early origins of watercolor at the very beginning of our creative impulses as human beings. In ancient Egypt, 5,000 years ago, they were using a type of watercolor that incorporated some of the same ingredients we use today, along with some other animal proteins, including things like casein, which is a type of milk protein. And I love this image. This is a 3,000-year-old Egyptian palette of color. And doesn't it look familiar? It looks just like the watercolor palettes that we use today or used when we were children. And the pigments in this are very similar. There's some iron oxide, some yellow ochre, some oxide black. So it's really amazing to see something that old, but still so familiar and with a lot of the same materials that we're using today. In Asia is where we see the development of watercolor that's most familiar to us today. As early as 4000 BCE, we see examples of watercolors and inks used on silk. And with the advent of paper in the 2nd century in China, we see watercolor really explode. And by the 4th century CE, landscape painting in watercolors is firmly established in China. In Mesoamerica, autonomously was another type of water media that was used. I love this blue. This is called Maya blue. It's a combination of copal, which is a tree resin, mixed with polygorskite, which is a type of clay, and also aneo, which is a form of the indigo plant, all mixed together. They actually burned it as incense. There was a whole ritual behind the making of this particular paint. And they used it in their artwork on a type of paper called the mate, which is pictured here. It's made from bark, but they also use it on clay and pottery and in their architecture. Really, really interesting to see, again, another form of watercolor that dates back to about 300 CE. The European tradition in watercolor begins in medieval times. We see it used often with tempera in combination with something that we would refer to as gouache today, and of course inks, primarily in illuminated manuscripts. These were typically done on a type of vellum or parchment, type of animal hide. Watercolors were also used to create these wonderful miniature portraits. We see one here that was actually painted on ivory, so a lot of different surfaces. Paper wasn't readily available yet. It took paper making in Europe several hundred years later from Asia. We see it first emerge in Spain in the European tradition in the 11th century, and then we can track it to Italy, then to France, then the Netherlands, and finally Germany at the end of the 14th century. Once paper making was established, it really changed the game as far as watercolors were evolved. First, we see it in manuscripts and codexes like you see pictured here. It continued to be a favorite medium in miniatures, and I love this one. This is on paper. I love that ultramarine blue. And then small studies of nature and still lifes, and I love that image by Albrecht Dürer. And it was Albrecht Dürer who really revolutionized in the 15th century how European artists looked at watercolor. And here's an example of what could be probably one of the first European examples of plein air painting with watercolor by Dürer. When we get to the 18th century, this is really the golden age of watercolor in Europe. This is by Sandby. And then probably one of my most favorite is Turner. His watercolors look so contemporary even today. But they really created watercolor as a standard, rivaling the importance of oil painting and the landscape tradition in England. Another thing happened during this time that's really important to the history of watercolor, and that was the development of the pan by the Reeves brothers in 1871. So the pan watercolors that we're all familiar with today were first introduced in the 18th century, and it really changed who had access to the paint. So it was no longer just the purview of professional painters, but we had enthusiasts and amateurs embracing it. If you were on the Grand Tour, or if you were a botanist on board a ship with the British Navy, often you would be documenting your journey using watercolors. In the Americas in the 19th century, watercolor continued to be a very popular medium. Here we see an image from Winslow Homer. Watercolor was used by many prominent painters who we think of as oil painters like Sargent, to great effect, both as something to use as studies, but also as finished artworks. This inset image is one I really love. It's by Fidelia Bridges. She was one of the only women watercolor painters in the Academy of Watercolor Painters at that time. And her success was phenomenal. Not only did people search out her original paintings, but they were reproduced quite frequently on greeting cards and products, you name it. So she was one of the most successful watercolor painters of the 19th century in the US. In the 20th century, in the modern era, we have artists like Paul Klee, pictured here, using watercolor to great effect. This was when he was in Morocco. And probably the most famous watercolor artist of the 20th century, Georgia O'Keeffe, in this beautiful landscape of New Mexico. Modern artists were really interested in watercolors for the expressive value of the materials themselves. And in these more abstract images, let the watercolor really express ideas based on how it interacted with the surface. Today, contemporary artists are still exploiting the nuanced effects that you can achieve with watercolor. Don't adjust your screen. This is not blurry. This is a watercolor painting by Yayoi Kusama. And it seems like it's out of focus, but what she's doing is using that bleeding effect that you can achieve with watercolor to kind of play with the idea of how we see and interpret images in general. A really wonderful image. You can get a sense not only in her signature, but some of the edges of the stains where it's in focus, but how she masterfully gives us this illusion of being out of focus using the watercolor, the unique properties of the watercolor medium. All
Jeff,
right,
real
Ecoline.
quick,
So I mentioned Ecoline
yeah,
starting in the
Jeff,
1930s. Yeah.
do you mind just repeating the name of that watercolor artist from the Academy that you
Oh,
mentioned with the
Fidelia Bridges. Yeah, Fidelia Bridges. So
Fidelia?
it's spelled F-I-D. Yeah, Fidelia Bridges. Yeah, she's
Thank
really
you.
wonderful. Worth looking up for sure. She also was an acclaimed oil painter, but her watercolors are just phenomenal.
Great, thanks.
All right. So Ecoline, as I mentioned before, was introduced by Royal Talens in the 1930s, and these are some of the original bottles. It came solely in these type of ink bottles and was used with a variety of drawing tools. But in 2016 and then 2017 in North America, the brush pen was introduced, and it really opened up the doors for who was using this wonderful product, this liquid watercolor, and how you could use it as well. So let's look at watercolor composition for a minute before we get into what liquid watercolors are. So first of all, there's a binder, and the binder for most watercolors is gum arabic, pictured here. And the binder used in Ecoline brush pens is also gum arabic. Coloring agents can include pigments or dyes. Pigments are most often used in artist quality coloring, but dyes are used in Ecoline, and I'll talk about why when we get to that portion. Other ingredients in watercolors can include plasticizers, so this keeps the paint from cracking. Glycerin is often used for that. Humectants help the paint to absorb more water. Honey, historically, is a wonderful humectant and is still used by some folks today. Dispersants are often needed. Some pigments are stubborn, so a dispersant like oxgall is added, and it helps the color flow more evenly through the vehicle. Extenders can be used sometimes, especially in student grade paints. Extenders replace some of the pigment, which is the biggest part of the expense of making the paint, makes it more affordable then. This is dextrin, which is often used as an extender. It also can be used as a thickener for some paints. And then preservatives. Preservatives are used a lot in watercolors just because we're using sometimes tap water in our pans, for example, and molds and all sorts of bugs can grow as a result. So different preservatives can be used. A good one to use at home is clove oil. It's used a lot successfully by artists to keep that mold at bay. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the binder, gum arabic. So the binder is what really gives watercolor its unique working properties. And the primary binder for watercolor for centuries and still today is gum arabic. Gum arabic is a type of tree sap, comes from the acacia tree, one of the oldest living organisms on the planet. It's harvested from wild trees from the Sahel region or sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see that pictured in the map. Most of the artists create gum arabic comes from Senegal. And you can see a picture here of gum arabic being harvested off of wild acacia trees in Senegal. What they do is score the branches and the sap oozes out and crystallizes and they harvest it. Gum arabic, it gets its name primarily from European traders in the 9th century who were getting it from North Africa. So it was called the gum of the Arabs, or Alsam al-Arabi was what they referred to it as. The technical term really would be gum of acacia. Gum arabic has some really unique features compared to other paint binders. Most paint binders create, when they dry, a discernible paint film. You know, acrylics, oil paints have that nice hard paint film. Gum arabic actually absorbs into the paper, and that's one of the reasons it's permeable and we can reactivate it when it's wetted again. So let's focus on pigments first before we get into dyes. This is how the pigments come to us in the factory, and this picture doesn't do it justice. It's literally as if a light were in these bags and you hear music in the background, oh, as the light glows off of them. It's really fantastic, just brilliant, brilliant color. We categorize pigments primarily in the art supply business based on their origin. So pigments can be organic, coming from plants or animals. They can be inorganic, coming from minerals, or they can be synthetic, which begins as either organic or inorganic, and then we cook it up. Sometimes literally, sometimes it's just a process of heating it. Other times it's a mixture of other chemicals with a particular pigment, or pigments mixed together. So synthesizing is what we do for the majority of colors today. Most of the modern colors on your palette today are synthesized, but synthetic pigments have been around for centuries, and some of the oldest pigments are actually synthetic pigments. So let's look at a couple examples. This is one of my favorite. This is where Tyrian purple comes from. This little mollusk here, that's a Mediterranean sea snail called the Murex. It takes hundreds of these little guys to make this beautiful purple that was first harvested and created by the Phoenicians in 1570 BCE. Matter of fact, the word Phoenician in Greek means land of purple. So this whole culture was kind of designated by the creation of this color. One of the unique features of this color compared to other organic types of dyes and pigments at this time was that it was very, very light fast. And there weren't very many light fast blues or violets at that time. So it made it even more valuable for folks, not just the cost of manufacturing it. The Romans called it imperial purple, and they actually passed laws that made it so that only the aristocracy could wear purple. And that tradition of purple being associated with royalty has continued to our own era. The image in the background is the shroud of Charlemagne, and it's dyed with Tyrian purple. Inorganic pigments are some of the oldest pigments. Some of the pigments that you see in the caves in Lascaux or Zambia, over 100,000 years old, are inorganic or mineral-based pigments. One of the most common is pictured here. This is iron oxide red. It is found in deposits all over the globe, and so it's used by many, many different cultures. It has many, many different names as a result. One of my favorite is caput mortuum, which is Latin for deadhead, but also Venetian red, terra rosa, red ochre, you name it. It can range anywhere from an orangish red to a dark brown. Most of what we use today is a synthetic version, which is purified from the original mineral, but there still are the traditional ones, which is PR 102, which is available as well. But a long history, one of the oldest histories and oldest pigments. And then finally, synthetic pigments. So I mentioned how these are the majority of pigments that we use today, but they have a long history also. Some of the very oldest ones, and this is an example, this particular yellow dates all the way back to ancient Sumeria. It was used by the Egyptians to color glass. This is the color we refer to today as Naples yellow. It was originally synthesized by melding lead and antimony together, so a fairly toxic process, but it created this very, very beautiful yellow that had the unique distinction from other yellows of being able to recede in space. So it made it really popular, especially in the 18th century with landscape painters, and it's still a really popular yellow with watercolor artists today. Naples yellow gets its name from the British and their visits on the Grand Tour to Naples. If you've ever been there, most of the city has this kind of yellow ochre stucco, but also it's thought that maybe it was all the sulfur deposits around Mount Vesuvius, but the origin of the pigment itself really has nothing to do with Naples, so it's more of a fashion term for the color. Today, we have substitutes in most paint makers' palettes because of the lead content of the original. There are very few folks who make the original Naples yellow. Most of what we see today in manufacturer brands are Naples yellow hues. So they're using other pigments to simulate this wonderful and very old pigment. All right, so dyes. So dyes are distinct from pigments in a couple different ways. The first is that it chemically bonds to the binder, which is different than what happens with pigments. Pigments do not chemically bind. They create a suspension where dyes create a solution. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. The majority of dyes come from organic sources, mainly natural dyes are called natural dyes from roots, berries, barks, insects. Cochineal is probably one of the more infamous there. Most dyes today are synthetically produced from both organic and inorganic materials. Dyes, for the most part, are not light fast. We refer to dyes as being fugitive, meaning they fade in a short amount of time compared to pigments. So that's one of the reasons pigments are more often chosen to make artist materials. But dyes have some advantages. So when you talk about dyes versus pigments, you're really talking about the difference between a solution versus a suspension. So a solution is, think of salt or sugar in water, stirred up, completely dissolves. That's what happens with a dye. It completely dissolves and bonds on a molecular level with whatever its solvent is. And so when it goes into a surface, like a piece of paper or a fabric, it chemically bonds with the surface as well. Pigments are held in suspension. Pigments don't dissolve. Think of putting sand in a cup of water. You can stir it up and it'll spread out or disperse, but eventually it'll sink back down to the bottom. So a binder for a paint has to hold pigment in suspension, and we call that combination a suspension. So what's the benefits of one versus the other? So with dyes, that means they have better adhesion. They're literally bonding with the material they are being painted onto or dyed to. So when you paint or brush on a dye color onto the surface of a paper, it's actually bonding with the paper molecular level. Pigments don't have as good adhesion as a result of the difference in the way that they bond with the binder and the surface. Lifting is definitely on the side of the pigments. It's harder to lift dyes. Almost all dyes are what you would refer to in watercolor as staining colors. Pigments are much easier to lift than dye-based colors, and you'll see some of that in the demonstration I do today. Luminescence is on the side of dyes. So because you have this bonding of the color with the solution and onto the surface, you have really the ultimate amount of color dispersion. So when light hits it and reflects back to us, we see all of the color. With pigments, albeit it's very small, there are microscopic gaps between the pigment that the light travels through. So it's a little different in how we see the light. It's not as saturated. So we get a lot more luminescence from dyes than we do pigments. We also get more contrast for the same reason. So there's a higher contrast between your darker values and lighter values with dyes than there are with pigments. Both these things together make it really wonderful to reproduce digitally. So if you're taking pictures of your work, if your work is more ephemeral, for example, or you're doing illustration and design that's meant to be reproduced, dyes can often be superior because they photograph a lot better. Color mixing is, again, probably better on the side of dyes due for the same reasons of that bonding, that even distribution of color, although pigments do great color mixing as well. And then finally, light fastness. This is totally on the side of pigments. Almost all dyes are fugitive, meaning they fade in less than 10 years. Pigments, especially artist grade pigments, excellent grade pigments, will be 100 plus years under museum light conditions. All right, so what is a liquid watercolor? What's different between a liquid watercolor and a traditional watercolor? Like inks, liquid watercolor is a concentrated dye solution. So it's already mixed together. There's a little bit of water in a tube of watercolor. There's absolutely no water in a pan. A liquid watercolor has already a significant amount of water in it. Brilliant transparent color that can be diluted with water to achieve varying hues. So you can still add more water to it to make it even more transparent than it is. You can do a lot of the same techniques with it as a result, but it's still this concentrated solution that can be worked right out of the jar, or in this case, out of the brush pen. Liquid in form, it doesn't need to be activated. One of the great things about the brush pen, right? You don't need to fill it with anything. You just go right to work. It's available in bottles, but brush pens are what we're going to be focusing on today. Valued for their color strength and fluidity, liquid watercolors are very versatile. You can use them with a lot of other wet and dry media, along with traditional watercolor techniques that are also excellent for use in calligraphy, fountain pens, airbrushes, you name it. So some of the qualities of the Ecoline brush pen. So we got 62 colors. 2 of these colors are new and they're actually opaque. So 60 of the colors, most of the colors are very transparent. Wonderful for those optical color mixtures of layering. There are 2 opaque colors. There's a white and there's a gold. And you can mix those with these to create more opaque effects. Really fun to do. I don't have any of those in today's demonstration, but it's worth checking out if you like what you see with the Ecoline today. They have 100% gum Arabic binder, so they are a true watercolor. Bottles, brush pens, dual tip markers, they all use the same color system. So if you do end up seeking out some of these other mediums for this color, all you have to do is match the color on that marker. They're best in class for adhesion to surfaces. We talked about how dyes are superior for this. So they really adhere well to the surfaces that you place them on. All transparent colors, with the exception of those 2, really high contrast, excellent for reproduction, as I mentioned. They're very fast drawing. This is one thing I really love them. The brush pens are just awesome for sketchbooks, for urban sketchers, for travel. You can put some color down, brush it out, and it dries almost immediately. So it really lets you be spontaneous and on the go. They're excellent for light to dark watercolor techniques and optical mixtures, and I'm going to show some of those in the demo today. They work well in combination with traditional watercolors, inks, and other dry media, as I mentioned. There's no problem using whatever travel pan set you have with these brush pens. You can use them together. They work really well. Same binder. They thin easily with water and make for easy cleanup, super easy to clean up. There's no odor to these. There's no harmful chemicals or solvents in the pen, so they're safe to use by everybody. All right, time for the demo. I'm going to stop the share here and see if we got any questions on that before we jump into the demonstration.
Well, we do actually have one question from Bev. She
Sure.
says, I've heard you shouldn't spritz all your paints, but then I see many artists doing it. Can you explain which is best, please?
You shouldn't what your paints? I'm sorry.
Spritz. So I guess spray with water.
Spritz them with water. Oh, yeah, that's a common practice that I follow in a lot of the watercolor artists. If you're talking about pre-spritzing or pre-wetting your pans, I think that's really helpful in releasing the color. And certainly saves on your brushes. With the Ecoline, there's no problem spritzing the color after it's on the paper to reactivate it, to brush it in, or to create unique effects with the spritzer itself. So there's no harm in doing that. What you do is you dilute it with water. So I guess you could say the more water you add to your watercolor, the less the strength of you make the binder less cohesive, I guess is a way to put it. But watercolor, like I said, absorbs into the paper already. So it's not the same thing as working with acrylic, for example, where adding too much water can compromise the integrity of the paint film, although you got to add a lot of it. But there shouldn't be any problem. So I'd be interested to see or hear where folks have some issues with spritzing because it's a pretty common practice as far as I'm aware.
Okay, great. We do have another question from Michelle. How do
Sure.
these compare to Primrosia brush pens? I honestly haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one either. I'll be honest with you. So I can't really comment on that. What I can say is these pens compared to some of the other watercolor brush pens that are out there. They are 100% gum Arabic binder, which makes them unique from some other of the competitors' pens. Some of the other pens are pigmented. These are dye-based, so they have different advantages as a result. The pigmented ones obviously are going to be more light fast. The dye ones are going to be more saturated and have higher contrast in their color. So it really depends on what your goals are as an artist. Um, yeah, so I'm not familiar with that type of pen, but yeah, if you want to send me some info on it, I'd be happy to look at it and share some info back for you.
That's all we have for now.
All right, so let me go ahead then and bring up the demo. All right, so you should see it come up on the screen here in a second. Everybody see that okay? The blue water?
Yep.
All right. All right, so the materials I want to go through with you, and so I pre-recorded this and I'm going to be talking over the recording. I'm going to go through each one of the pens here first. So this is 578. This is the same as the one in the sample kit. This is our sky blue. It's a great primary blue. Then I'm going to grab the yellow here, 205. This is lemon yellow. Again, a nice primary yellow. Here's the magenta, 337. You see those little numbers on them. And then here is the blender. This is the light orange, number 236. Here's our fun blue violet, really rich, fun color. And then finally, our green. So those are the colors brush pens we're going to be using today. This is just some tape. This is optional if you want to tape off your edge versus draw. Here is our brush today. I've got a number 8 there. It looks like round. Any size 6, 4, 8, 10 you like is fine. Just a pencil and a ruler. I've got a couple little plastic containers here I'm going to use for some of the effects we're going to do today. Got some rubbing alcohol. Don't use your vodka. Here's a little salt. And then, of course, I got my water cup here on the side. Then I have the papers, and I just drew a grid on this one. So this is a 140-pound watercolor paper cold press that I'll be working on today. You can use whichever surface that you prefer, and the colors will have different reactions as a result. So if you're in a really smooth surface, you're going to get more detailed images, sharper images, faster reactions to a wetted surface. With the cold press, of course, it's going to be a little more texture, a little more absorbent. So really, whatever you like to do, and I would encourage you to try these out on a lot of different surfaces, but we're going to be using the cold press today. And you can see I just broke it into 6 areas for this first one. Here I taped it off. I'm a little OCD, so I like to have that taped border. So I'm going to start with magenta first. You can start with any color that you like for this first test drive, if we will. So that's what the brush nib looks like up close. The cap will snap onto the back of it for convenience there. And then we're just going to draw some lines. From top to bottom, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to stop it here for a second. So what I want to do here, for those of you who are following along, is just see the different weight of lines I can get, different type of marks I can make with this brush nib. I'm going to start out by making a really fine line. And to do that, you hold the pen, the brush pen, as perpendicular to the surface as possible, and with a really light touch. So it's all about the angle that you're holding it to the surface and how much pressure you're applying to get variations in the color. And so you'll see, or the width of the line. So you see here as I went too far there. I'll go ahead and start it again. There we go. And you'll see as I go through this, how you can get different weights just by varying the angle and the pressure that you're applying with the brush pen to the surface. And so with this first line, I'm holding it almost perpendicular, very light pressure, and I'm just going to pull down on the paper. There we go, nice fine line. And I'm going to come back up, and this time I'm going to angle it a little more and a little more pressure. Little more angle, little more pressure, and you can see the wonderful variation, the different weights of lines you can get. Now I'm going to just make a little wavy line so you can see holding it at that perpendicular angle, now a little more to the side. See the kind of marks we can get. Love how the watercolor comes out of these. It's just easy color release. It's so fun. They're so juicy. And now just, playing around here. You can do whatever you want. You can go straight down, make little marks, little jabs. Just kind of see how you can get creative with this brush nib. And there you can get a closer look at some of the results of how it seems on the paper there. Now we're going to get the brush, and I'm going to get a little water on it, and I am going to pre-wet this area. So we're going to do the same thing essentially, but now we're going to be drawing into a pre-wet surface. So we're going to get more of what we would call a diffused line as a result. All right, I'm going to use the blue for this one. Again, you can use whatever color you would like. I'm going to start off the same way. A nice light pressure, but you can see because the surface is wet, we're getting some diffusion there. It's not a lot of diffusion. It doesn't bleed out or bloom like you would expect with a lot of traditional watercolor, but you are getting that fuzzier edge, a little more character. You can see the quality of the cold press paper and the way that it's bleeding out there. You can certainly see it when I do the little squiggly lines. And as I'm just dropping color in practically here, you can see how that starts to spread out. And I'll show a close-up of this here in a second so you can see the difference between the two. So there's into the wet surface. I'll go ahead and stop that so you can really take a close look at it comparatively. So here's the side on the dry surface, got a cleaner edge. And here in the wet surface, we get that nice diffused line. I love these little edges here. So you can get really expressive with these working into a wet surface. All right, this next one, I want to show you some of the transparency or the effects you can get utilizing the transparent these colors. We're going to do some glazes. So the first thing I'm going to do using the yellows, I'm going to put 3 lines, pretty broad strokes for this. Then I'm going to switch up and I'm going to get the magenta and I'm going to do the same thing underneath that. I'm going to make 3 more lines. You can do 2 lines if you want. 3 lines, we can get all the colors in there. So that's why I'm doing 3 for each. And then I'm going to do 3 with the sky blue at the bottom here. Nice broad strokes. So we got a lot of area to color. It's a little lighter. It's going to get a little darker here as I'm going. As I was working into that wet surface, it pulls some of the color out of the nib. All right, so I'm going to go over that first. There we go. Right across there. And then I'm going to go over the blue as well. See a nice orange we got there. And now we should get a nice green. So wonderful transparency, great optical color mixing here. So now I'm going to use the red. I'm going to do the same thing up above. I'm going to make an orange line. More dominant on the red side. Here we're going to make a violet. Oh yeah, great violet. And now finally with the blue, I'm going to create a green here on my last yellow line there. And I'm going to do the same thing with that last magenta. And so we have 2 versions of each mixture, but different order. So I'll stop it there. So you can see little differences here. This is the red over the blue. This is the blue over the red. Here's the red over the yellow over. Same with the greens. They're very similar, but you can see where one is a little more dominant than the other. But really nice optical mixture that you can achieve using these pens. Nice secondary colors there. All right, so this seems crazy, right? I'm going to stop it here. So what I'm doing is I'm transferring color from one pen to the other. So I'm going to get this multicolored line. Some folks are probably saying, aren't you going to ruin the yellow nib? And you won't. You may stain it a little bit, but these are self-cleaning, if you will. And you'll see as I draw with the line, the blue watercolor is going to come out of the pen almost completely by the time I get finished. So I'm going to try to transfer as much of this sky blue into the yellow. This works better, this technique, if you're putting a darker color onto a lighter color. So got that on there. And this is a really fun technique to do. And then you can make whatever kind of line you like. And look at that beautiful green. But as I work through it, the yellow's pushing it back out. And by the end, I'm getting to almost 100% yellow line again. Isn't that fantastic? That is so fun. Great for lettering techniques, doing calligraphy. These pens are really, really fun for that purpose, but you can see the result there. Here, I'll go back so you can get a better look at that. There we go. Isn't that fun? Almost completely green up above, but you can see how quickly and how efficiently it comes out. And if you want to get it even cleaner than that, all you have to do is kind of dip the brush nib into some water swish it around a little bit, just like you would cleaning a brush, and then dry it off on a paper towel and draw with it a little bit, and it'll come back. All right, now we're going to do some blending. I'm going to lay down some of the magenta here. You can lay down any color you like. So now I'm going to use a brush with some water to show you how, say you're out sketching and you want to color in an area and then pull that color down. Really easy to do, even after it's been dry for a while. Now, remember I said how these act all as staining colors. So even though I'm doing this pretty quickly after I lay down the color, I won't get rid of that edge of where the mark was completely. So that's one advantage to pigmented colors versus dye-based colors. These don't lift as well, but they lift pretty good. And you can see I'm getting a nice gradation here, nice color throughout just by using some water mixing into those marks. So you really can get into these with your brush and do a lot of traditional watercolor effects as a result. Kind of cleaning it up a little bit here. There, get a nice gradation there with this one color gradation. All right, so this time I'm going to lay down a little yellow. I'm going to put all three colors down this time. Get as much color as I can on there. Just quick and easy. They're so user-friendly, these brush pens. And I'm just using the three primaries for most of this. You've got 60 colors to choose from, so the variations are really endless. All right, so I've got my three primaries down, and now I'm going to go back to the brush. Well, first I'm going to do the blender. I'll show you how to use the blender here and the brush together. So we'll do the color with the brush and just blend these two colors together. So really nice, easy to blend. Clean my brush out there, get some of that yellow back over it. So real quick, easy blend. Not going to get too fussy over it here. All right, going to push the water aside. Now we'll use the blender and we'll see how that works. So the blender just has kind of a gum arabic solution in it, mostly water, but you can blend pretty easily with it as well. It's a nice tool, especially if you don't have a water source with you. If you're just going around with some pens and you don't have to worry about that and you still have that nice convenience. Look at that great violet. Love the mixture. So I pulled the tape off of it and here's how they look as a demo board. All right, I've got a few more here. So let's have some fun. I'm gonna tape off another piece of paper. Again, this is the 140-pound cold press. This is speeded up. I'm not this quick. And I'm just going to do 4 areas for this one. All right. So there you can see the edges are all taped off. If you don't want to use tape, just divide your sheet into 4 spaces. You can use a pencil or you can just eyeball it. So this first thing I'm going to do, you've probably seen salt techniques before where you put salt on the surface of watercolor to create that kind of granulated look. You can also add salt to water to create this fun solution that makes the paint spread out more quickly or bleed or bloom more rapidly. Think of it as a saltwater pool versus a traditional pool. It's really, you float really easily in salt water or you sink a little bit in fresh water. And I'm going to stop here and finish my thought there. And so the same thing happens with your color. When you paint into just regular water, the color will bleed and bloom, but when you paint into salt water, it bleeds much more rapidly and disperses much more easily. So in this first space, I'm just putting down traditional water, just like I was on the space before. I got my water jar there, I'm wetting it. And I'm going to draw a few lines of color with each of the pens. So you can see
Jeff,
again.
really quickly, we've got a question here. How do you clean the blender?
Just in water. Just rinse it in water and then get a piece of scratch paper and make a few lines until you get completely clean. It cleans out really easily. You'll see some staining to the nib itself, but that color won't transfer.
Great. Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, so I'm pulling the yellow through the water. This is just regular water for this first one. You see a little bit of the bleed on the edges there. Get that nice blurred, diffused line. So here is my saltwater solution. And you can play around with ratios. This is about, I'm going to say, I put in there maybe a teaspoon of salt and maybe 3 or 4 ounces of water if I were to measure it. But you can play around with that. There's no definitive quantity. The more salt you add, the more extreme the effect. So here's the salt water going down. This is something you can do with traditional watercolors too. I would encourage you to try it. It's a super fun technique. Now we get a much broader line. Look at that. And the color is diffusing out a little more quickly. Same thing there. Look how quickly it spreads out on the edges. And look at that blue. You really see it, how rapidly the color diffuses and how farther it diffuses out. So the salt water will really give you a more extreme version of bleeds and blooms, both with this pen and with traditional watercolor. So fun technique to try if you've never tried it before. And then when that dries, it's really fun to go over it with other mixed media like inks. Look at how much more diffused it was as it was sitting there. All right, I'm just going to color in half of it. You can use whatever color you like for this one. I'm just doing 2 colors here, overlapping them. And so what I'm going to do in this process, I paused it here for a second. I'm going to create a gradation or a blend between these 2 colors. And then I'm going to use rubbing alcohol and I'm going to splatter the rubbing alcohol onto the surface. This is a technique that you might have seen before. And I just want you to see what it looks like using the Ecoline. So now I'm going to add a little water to the surface. I'm going to blend these colors together, fill up this whole space here with color. Again, how easily it picks up and you're able to manipulate it with your brush. Nice purple in the middle there. All right, now is the part with the alcohol. So I've cleaned my brush out. I've dipped in the alcohol. You can see it there. That's just your rubbing alcohol. And then what I'm going to do is tap the brush on the edge of the cup here. And you can see how it immediately pushes the color out. Really fun textures and fun effects that you can get with this. And there up close, you can see it's kind of a bleed on top of a bleed. Really fun technique to use. Now, this next one is going to be with the rubbing alcohol again, but in reverse. And this may be unfamiliar to you. I think a lot of folks have seen the alcohol before, maybe not with the Ecoline. But this is where we're actually going to put the rubbing alcohol down on the paper first. So I'm going to brush out some lines here. Just little wavy lines. You can make whatever type of lines you like. And what's going to happen by doing this, I'll let a couple more spots I think I'm going to do here. So what's happening is the alcohol is disrupting the sizing in the paper. So sizing is something that's used in the paper making process, both internally and externally for watercolors. Internally when the pulp is being milled, and then externally after the sheet has been rolled out. And what it does is controls absorption of the color. It keeps the paper from being like blotting paper. But when you put the rubbing alcohol on there, it dissolves some of that. So it creates an area that's going to be more absorbent. So let's see what happens when I go over it now with a marker. See those areas that are darker? Those areas are more absorbent, so they're taking more color out of the marker. You can do this for traditional watercolors as well, kind of like secret writing. But you can create some really fun effects with it. Isn't that cool? So you've kind of disrupted the sizing and created some more absorbent areas where the color gets soaked up more and you get this darker value as a result. And there's the tape removed. All right, so this last one I'm going to do, this is kind of an optional one. If you have a stencil around, this is a fun technique where we're going to do some lifting using a stencil and a sponge. So this is kind of an extra, wasn't part of the original one, but I thought it would be fun to just share with you. I'm using some of the other colors that we introduced at the beginning. I'm just laying some color down. No particular rhyme or reason here, just having a little fun. Creating that space for art to happen, right? All right.
Jeff,
Yeah.
for the alcohol part, what percentage
Mhm.
of alcohol was that? Was it
That
rubbing
was 70.
alcohol? 70? Okay.
The rubbing alcohol, 70%. Isopropyl alcohol, 70%. Now, I've tried other ones. They all work to varying degrees. The 70 is just what I had on hand. So I would experiment. Like I said, just don't use your vodka on that. All right. So I've got some color here. You can use any stencil you want over the top. I just had this one handy. This is a 6x6 stencil. And I've got a kitchen sponge here that I've already dampened. You don't want too much water. You want to get it wet, squeeze it out. It needs to be damp, but you don't want it to be soaking wet. And then you just rub, you just clean. So what you're doing is lifting color, but you're also pushing color underneath the edges of the stencil. You're creating some sharp edges around those shapes while you're wiping and lifting color out. And I'm just doing this really quickly. You can create some really wonderful effects this way. And I just wanted to give you a glimpse of how this looks with the Ecoline, because you can lay down color really quickly and then lift color out. Isn't that fun? I love this technique. It's really fast, instant gratification, and gives you this really kind of sophisticated look that you can go and then work back into with more watercolor or other media as well. All right. That is it. Let me go ahead and come back to y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed that demonstration and the information. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Um,
I didn't introduce you guys.
had one.
Okay.
I'm just curious about combining it with your other watercolors. So is it easy
Totally,
to
yeah, totally
interchange?
safe. Yep. No issues. It's 100% gum arabic binder, which most professional as well as student grade watercolors are made with. Even watercolors that are made with alternative binders like glycol will mix really well with Ecoline. So there's no conflict, no issues to be worried about using them with traditional colors. Just keep in mind, these are dye-based, where most of your other watercolors are going to be pigmented. So they'll have a different look and feel. These colors won't be as permanent, but they'll be brighter and more brilliant, really intense. Great question. Thank you.
How long do these last before running out?
You know, I'm trying to, usually I go by refills. These are technically not refillable, but I do know people who use the bottled jars of Ecoline and the pipette in them to refill them themselves. I've found that you can get, typically it's 7 to 8 refills out of a marker nib. There are nibs that are available under the Pantone brand that will fit these pens too. But they are pretty long lasting. And also they have a great cap off time too. I've left the cap off of these for hours at a time. And even if they do dry out, let's say you leave it overnight and the nib dries out, all you have to do is put it in some water to reactivate it. But I'm going to say 7 to 8 refills. So they last quite a while. It's a 4 milliliter reservoir. Great question.
There was a question, and I can share the images if you need a refresher, Jeff, but there looks like there are some other demo examples in some of the feature images we had for the event. If there were any other special techniques you were using for those other
Yeah, I
types,
might
or
need to see that.
okay, let me see.
I think some of those
This.
images also included some of the bottled liquid watercolor effects. That may be what looks different. But you can do all the same effects with either or. You just have a little more fluidity and you're using a brush primarily with those colors.
I'm gonna share
Let
it in the
me,
chat if that helps you.
all right, I'll look at my chat here. All right, yeah. So what I've done here, the first image there, this top one is the same one I did. I just did a solid area and then drew lines through it instead of just covering over the lines. This is the blend where I colored in with the markers and then just use a brush to blend them together. This one, instead of coloring my yellow pen with the marker, touching them together, I dipped my marker into some other color and used it that way. This one here, I just put water on there and then I dropped color in using my pens. And that's what created these little areas. So I put little puddles of water on there, dropped color in, and the water, or the color diffused through them. And then I just colored this other area in with a yellow marker. This is the alcohol technique, which we did. And this is the alcohol technique down here as well. This is the same stencil technique I showed, but I also did an alcohol layer at the very beginning. That's where you get this really dark value from, was the alcohol underneath it. So that's the only differences there. Pretty much the same thing, just in some different approaches.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
And sorry if I missed it, but if they dry out, how do you reactivate? Did you?
If the marker itself dries out, the
Yeah.
brush pen, you just
Mm-hmm.
dip it in water. So it's a gum arabic solution, the binder for it, which is soluble in water, completely permeable. So if it dries out, you just kind of soak it in a little bit of water, and then it takes a little time for the ink to start, or the watercolor to start to run through it as you're drawing on a sheet of paper, but it'll come back to life. It's miraculous. It's really wonderful. It makes them super fun and easy to use, even for kids who might forget to put the caps back on.
And can you go over how much salt you were using with the salt technique, the salt and water?
So I had about a teaspoon of salt in that container and maybe 2 or 3 ounces of water. It wasn't very much, but it's not a steadfast ratio that you have to follow. I'll often use about a tablespoon of salt and a cup of water, and that works just fine too. So you can find the sweet spot for yourself. The more salt, or the higher the ratio of salt in the mixture, the more diffusion you're going to get.
Um, how should they be stored? Vertical or horizontal?
It's best to store them horizontally for sure. That keeps the watercolor evenly through there. You can store them cap down, but just beware, they'll get really juicy when you first make a mark. If you store them cap up, depending on how long you've been using that, it may take a while for the watercolor to come back, but it will come back. But best way to store them is just on their side.
Okay. Can Dorland's wax be used to seal the artwork?
Yes, it's a true watercolor in every sense. It's the only difference from your traditional watercolors is that it's dye, coloring agent versus pigment, but the binder is exactly the same. So the same processes can be used, techniques can be used for preserving it.
Would you be able to go over how to use the blender again? The
Yeah,
blender
let me
brush pen?
see. I have lost the screen here. Where did you guys go? Can you see me still?
Yes. Yes, I
I
can.
can't see you guys. Let me see. Here we go. Oh, here we go. This might be it. I see the little screen up there. If I pull that out, I'll get everybody. Yeah, I have lost the screen for some reason. I see you guys in my little corner screen, but I don't have my regular screen with the tools to share. I'll just describe it. So it's really easy. So the blender essentially is the same as all the other brush pens, the same nib. It just doesn't have color. Think of it as watercolor without the dye or the pigment. Same gum arabic solution that's inside of there, just no color. So to use it, you apply the color with the brush pen where you want it, and then you can just go over it and pull the color with the blender really easily. So you could pull one color down or blend two together like I did in the example. You can use just the tip of the blender for small effects. You can go back in and move color around, really create some fun details, or you can use it on its side and create broader strokes and broader blends. Really convenient if you don't have water with you. If you're out sketching with your sketchbook, for example, and you don't have a source of water to work with, the blender can come in handy. But it's just as easy to do all those techniques with a brush and a little bit of water too.
Awesome. Do you have an idea of how long the Ecoline paints last before they lose their light fastness or begin to fade?
I lost you there.
Oh, um, how long do the colors last with their how long until they lose their light fastness
The light fastness.
begin to yeah.
So their colors are rated 0 to 10 years. So it's really going to depend. Oh, I love that picture, Carol Asher, sweetie. The colors, 0 to 10 years is the rating for them. It really depends on the type of light you're exposing it to. If you're just in the studio or it's interior light, it's going to last a long time. If you're storing these in a flat file where they're out of the light, you're going to get the 10 years plus. If this is somewhere where it's getting sun exposure, you're going to see it fade in a couple of years. But it won't be immediate. It isn't something that's going to fade like over the course of weeks or months even. It's going to take a while. But it will eventually fade. It won't disappear. It'll just dull as time goes on, and you won't have the vibrancy. Yeah, the real advantage to these colors and how they were originally formulated by Royal Talens in the 1930s was specifically for the use eventually of photography, right? So really saturated colors, immediate work that was meant to be reproduced or printed in other ways. So having that high luminescence, high contrast was more important than the light fastness.
Great, cool. So they're a great like study tool that you can bring back to your studio
Absolutely.
and then yeah,
Studies,
capture the vibrancy of
sketches,
the colors.
closed up in a sketchbook, they're going to last for a long time. Or in the case that I mentioned, for folks who are like reproducing their images and sharing them on Instagram or social media where the work is more ephemeral, they're perfect for that.
Um, oh, I think Jessica's answering it, but maybe you could go back over if you need to clean the blender in any way.
Just rinse it out in water is all it takes. Like if you have your little water cup, or when you get back home, just run it underneath the sink, and that'll clean it out. It may be stained from the other colors, but when you use it again, it'll be clear again. You want to, after you've rinsed it with water, draw a little bit on a blank piece of paper or scratch piece of paper to get the gum arabic flowing again. But it'll work fine, and you won't see that color get mixed in after that. They're really handy that way. I love the convenience of them.
Could you spray fixative to extend the life of the artwork?
You know, fixative is going to protect the surface to a degree if you're talking about a fixative that has a UV type of coating. But even with UV protection or UV glass, it's not going to be a permanent color. You may extend it and protect it for a while, but it's still not going to be permanent.
Very cool. Any other questions? We had a lot of good ones.
I'm glad. And thank you everybody for joining today. This has been awesome. I love to see the great turnout. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation and the demonstration.
Yeah. Can you apply the color to a palette and then add water? Did you catch
You
that?
can.
Oh,
Yes, yes. So you can apply the color onto a palette. Yeah, and then lift it again with water later on. I've even done some demos where we pre-colored little color swatches on the bottom of a piece of paper and then went off out to do some plein air work, and then grabbed that sheet of paper and then used where we colored on the bottom of the palette as our color. It wasn't, you know, incredibly saturated color, but it was effective, and we were able to sketch with it.
Very cool. That's a nice portable way to use them for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Great.
they're easy. You know, all you needed the three primaries, and you stick those in your back pocket, and you take your sketchbook and you hit the road, and you're in business.
Awesome. Great. Looks like this is, oh, we got another one from Bev. So she's following up on the question about spritzing your watercolors. One artist said it damages the gum arabic. Do you think that's true? You did say it might dilute it a little bit and lose.
Yeah, it really shouldn't damage the gum arabic. I mean, gum arabic is a water-soluble binder, been used in centuries in watercolors and inks and gouache, pastel even. It's very safe to use with water in any ratio, really. So I'm not sure how spritzing the pan, or in this case, spritzing what you've drawn with the brush pen is going to damage anything. Yeah, maybe the type of water, maybe tap water they're talking about, and versus distilled water. There can be impurities in the tap that can affect the quality of the paint. So a lot of professional artists recommend using just distilled water with pan colors or when mixing with your tube color. But yeah, I really don't think spritzing should be a problem. If you're spritzing like your palette of pans to moisten them up ahead of time, I'm not sure how that's going to damage the gum arabic, but I'll be certain to pass that on to our lab to see if there's any feedback on that, and what they might recommend.
Awesome.
Always
Great.
love to learn new things.
Yeah. Looks like we might be at the end of our questions.
Oh, fantastic.
Thanks so much, Jeff. If you have any last words for
Thank
the
you.
day.
No,
Thank
just
you,
thank you
everyone.
again for having me, you guys. It's great to be here, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's great to see so many people, and I hope you go out and give these a test drive.